name is Jaden Beck, and I live in Ithaca, New York, where I work as a clean energy project associate. It's such a pleasure to be able to spend time speaking with everybody today about my career path and the guiding principles I found along that journey. I think it speaks to the type of job fair that we're hoping to have that Nest invited me to speak for this portion of the event, as I'm not a career advisor by trade. And in fact, only a year ago, I was in the same shoes as many of you in my senior year at Binghamton, stressed and trying to find my best path forward. However, exactly a year ago today, I had also landed an offer for my dream job, which marked the end of navigating through 4 years of change, opportunity, and hope that we all experienced during college, and actually beginning to grasp what the start of my career would look like. So in thinking through accepting the offer to speak, I put a lot of thought into the question of what did I need to hear a year ago that would have made me more confident and motivated for my job search ahead? And that's exactly what I hope some people are able to gain from me speaking today. With that being said, the last thing that I want is to be sharing my story as an exact template to be followed, or that my attitude toward a job search is the only attitude that you can have. Career advice is not one size fits all, so I hope that you take only what you need and leave the rest. However, I do think that personal stories help to illustrate many of the nuances that we experience during this time in our lives. So I'd like to start by telling you all how I went from being in a student position to standing on the other side of a podium today. My story starts in 2019, when, like many students, after excelling in my math and science courses in high school and wanting to challenge myself further, I found myself at Binghamton University, about to begin my undergraduate degree in a STEM field, with my major being chemistry. And at the time, to me, making an impact on climate meant solving its root scientific problem through new technologies and research. And as a result, I joined my first research lab, which focused on creating catalysts to convert solar energy to fuels. But I found myself quietly thinking more and more, when is knowing the point group of my molecule going to actually translate into the solar energy part? So despite having an incredibly supportive PI, I left that position to go closer to where the environmental impacts were. And my next position was in an environmental chemistry lab, where I had spent a year independently developing a method to detect microplastics in water. And this position had brought me right up to my junior year, when, if it hasn't kicked in before, you really start to think to yourself, what am I going to do after all of this? And that question led me right to my first turning point in college, when I had attended a senior chemistry capstone event just to get some extra credit for a lab class that I was taking. However, I spent the evening walking between rows of posters, witnessing the energy flow from each student sharing about their research and watching them lean into questions that would have normally made me squirm in my research. So when I drove back to my apartment that night, I remember sitting in my car and finally admitting to myself, this was not it for me. Here were 2.5 years of trying to hone a scientific skill set and trying to make a climate impact that had ended up actually draining my energy rather than fueling me forward. So I knew I had to pivot, but if I could only share one thing about that period, it was that I was so unsure about stopping halfway in my path to explore something else. However, a very narrow opportunity presented itself through an internship with the Network for a Sustainable Tomorrow to use my skill set in an entirely different way than I had before. And I told myself that if the energy I felt for this opportunity was right, that it would happen. And as confidence would have it, I received that internship, and my options opened completely to addressing a spectrum of climate and social impacts that I had been isolated from before. And with Nest, suddenly I was transitioning or translating the science behind existing renewable energy technologies into the elements of health, comfort, and sustainability that help to meet the needs of our communities. So I went into my senior year of college working with Nest, which allowed me to gain a sense of purpose in removing fossil fuels from our buildings and our communities, and to experience a team that pushed me to take on responsibility and to lean into my strengths. And I felt confident in the work that I was doing and so eager to find a role that would carry this momentum into the start of my career. And it was around this time that I started to plant the seeds of my job search, scouring job boards and searching renewable energy jobs an embarrassing amount of times on LinkedIn to no avail. I had realized that I already found a niche in the sustainability field that made me feel so fulfilled, which is what made viewing the prospects of a solar energy job or energy storage job at a random energy company in the country pretty demotivating to me. What I knew I wanted deep down was a job in the building energy sector in New York, and I just didn't know exactly how I was going to get there. And this is where the biggest moment sticks out to me in my job search. I remember I wanted to have a conversation with a family friend who has owned a clean energy consulting firm for the past 2 decades and who also happened to be a Binghamton alum. I entered this conversation with two hopes. One, that I could share my growth and accomplishments with this connection, and two, that I could gain some industry insights or helpful advice to get me out of my job search slump. But before I knew it, I was sitting there and listening to someone tell me that based on the preferences that I had at my stage in my career, that I was going to have to settle, that I was best off going to work in an office for an HVAC contractor, and that I should really just let go of my expectations for my first job. And that was the conversation. After momentarily feeling the weight of thinking that that had to be true for me, suddenly every opportunity that I was hesitant about before was exactly what I wanted to tackle the next day. So flash forward to March 25th of 2023. I'm accepting a job offer from a company called BlocPower that I've been following and admiring for a year, and that role is centered in building relationships within the Ithaca community to achieve the first citywide electrification initiative in the country. So not only did I meet my expectations for my first job, but I exceeded them, and I was met with enthusiasm and excitement for my candidacy. Could not explain to you how incorrect being advised to settle that day was, but I could go on about how good it felt to know that the start of my career was going to be on a team that valued me in an energy sector that I had found purpose in. So looking back, there were 3 guiding principles that got me exactly where I'd hoped to be. The first one being, even though it's hard, seek clarity on what it is you want to do. Now, this piece of advice does not mean that I think that everyone should know that they exclusively want to be a wind energy resource analyst or an environmental compliance specialist. But instead, this should motivate you to narrow in on what gives you the most energy and hope in this field, and what you are the best at in your current school or work settings that you want to continue to hone. So maybe this is as simple as you really want to have a role that requires monitoring an environmental resource. Or in my case, I really wanted to have a role that required communicating with communities on energy. Anything like that will help you to find a bit more comfort and confidence in your job search. The second principle is to lean into being a new face and a new perspective. I think as a new person in the workforce, you may feel like you're already at a disadvantage by not having as much experience in the field. However, you are a fresh slate who has just spent years absorbing the newest perspectives on this field, and that can therefore play into an advantage of truly having curiosity and the desire to continue to learn. Think of it this way. If you don't have a specific role in mind, like we mentioned in the first principle, you might want to start at the other end by identifying a high-impact organization or company whose message inspires you. I would encourage you to follow them or to even reach out to a staff member or two by starting to gain a natural sense of curiosity and the desire to help reach a shared goal that will always stand out in a job search. And third, when all else fails, know how to tell your career story. I think it can feel like the requirements for entry-level jobs continue to get tougher and tougher. And in those cases where your resume may be missing a skill or an experience, if you start to become comfortable with the story of what you have done in the past, where your strengths truly lie, and why that means that you are in front of them now, you'll definitely have a stronger basis for getting your foot in the door. So in my story, these principles worked efficiently and quickly to land a role that was aligned with what I wanted. However, this process can also simply help you work up to that dream over time. This concept can be a long-term motivator for you. It doesn't need to be an overnight success for it to be useful. In other words, if you do end up landing a job that does not feel like your dream, that does not immediately mean that you are settling. So long as you continue to evaluate your purpose and trust your gut in knowing when you need to pivot, you will ultimately find stepping stones to get you even closer to where you want to end up. So in closing, I know that this can be an incredibly stressful time, and that it can feel like all of your efforts throughout college are dictated by how this goes. But no matter what thoughts you've had or what steps you've taken before today, you are all capable and deserving of whatever outcome you choose to set your mind to. And I look forward to hearing more successes, skills, and stories throughout the remainder of this job fair.